Christopher Kane, once poster child for London Fashion Week, announced recently that they would be filing for bankruptcy. So what happened to turn this once heralded, Kering-owned label into the financial struggle that it has become? And why, despite how it seems now, may this not be the end of the company? Christopher Kane began his company with his sister Tammy so soon after graduating that he jokes that it was only 4 hours after, which means that his first collection can be considered as his graduate collection, Autumn-Winter 06, which was actually funded personally by Donatella Versace. The collection features a lot of the codes that the house would come to be known for, such as color blocking, the use of mesh or lace, and bodycon dresses, all of which would grow to be real staples for the brand. They were not only creatively interesting for the time, but also financially viable due to their commerciality, which saw them win the Harrods Award of £1,500, a window display in Harrods, and they scored stockists in London, Paris, and Milan. This would be enough for most to set up their business from graduation, but like I just alluded to, Kane had another feather in his hat after being taken under the wing of Donatella Versace. The pair had met after he won the 2005 Lancôme Color Award while he was doing the MA course at Central St. Martin's, which brought him to the attention of Anna Wintour, who hooked him up with Donatella after a fashion show, who, only a week later, would offer him a job. But, knowing he wanted to start his own label, he'd actually turned her offer of a full-time designer role down, and instead, she offered him a role as a consultant on their couture line, accessories, and shoes. It was this that would really help fund the early days of the company and his first independent show, Spring-Summer 07, that was also partially funded by NewGen. He said in this interview that this collection was a continuation of his graduate collection, this time securing it as a brand unaffiliated with the school that he had recently graduated from. Because of this, we saw all of the mesh/lace, color blocking, and bodycon staples, as well as new signatures like the safety buckle and neon. The collection once again balanced that line between creative and commercial so perfectly, and so it seems that they were a brilliant bet for any investors looking to freshen their portfolio with a potentially very powerful brand. This would come in the interest from Topshop, who were dominating the British fashion high street at the time and had a pretty heavy hand in London Fashion Week too, with the NewGen program that they were a main sponsor of at the time. Topshop and NewGen signed a deal with Christopher Kane shortly after the Spring 07 show that really tested this potential commerciality. You see, as his very rare dresses were selling at Browns for £1,000, which by the way Susie Bubble has one and she shows it off in this closet tour, he was to produce a high street version of his designs for his first collection in Topshop that debuted even before their second mainline standalone collection in the January-February of 2007, so goes to evidence just how much of a burgeoning talent they were to have this huge contract before their second collection. This would be the beginning of a wonderful partnership for the company, as they, Christopher and Tammy Kane, both registered as a company in November 2006, just a couple months before the Topshop collection dropped, and as they came into their second NewGen-funded standalone mainline show, Autumn-Winter 07. This season would mark a turning point for Christopher Kane, as they managed to retain both relationships in NewGen, Topshop, and the British Fashion Council, who would fund both the Spring and Autumn 08 collections while simultaneously pushing for the brand very hard in promotional materials. They had features on the Marie Claire, Guardian, and Grazia YouTube channels. Obviously, they had multiple magazine spots. I remember them really dominating Vogue and Grazia at this time. And they even had a documentary on the BBC, on BBC Two no less, so it was free to watch. This period ended around Autumn-Winter 08. But that wasn't really a bad thing, as it was also shortly after this that Christopher Kane personally would be appointed as creative director of Versus, the Versace diffusion line, which of course would help finance the fashion shows, meaning that they were, for a small business, profitable and in fact quite financially stable. He had become one of the hottest designers in all of London that all of the big fashion editors would want to attend, and simultaneously had the commercial side in a grip as well. with this interview with Natalie Massenet of Net-a-Porter before their Spring '09 show, in which she explains that he is one of their more important designers because of his ability to mix commerciality with conceptualism, something that proved to be true when this collection sold out on their site in only 24 hours. The collection itself also pushed the Christopher Kane cinematic universe forwards with an introduction of the infamous laser-cut leathers and netting, which here gave an incredible movement to the clothes and would also go on to be a signature, either in this way or in the layering of nets, which comes back in several collections. They also in this collection started the trend of hyper-real images printed on garments, which will go on to be a signifier of Riccardo Tisci's Givenchy, which is a take I'm directly lifting from Jasmina's YouTube channel on Christopher Kane. So not only was he very anticipated, but also very influential and very commercial, something that continued into his third and biggest Topshop collection to date in 2009 that had customers queued outside the store for hours. By spring 2011, they had proven themselves as a business, but their success was only to be boosted once more by this collection, which was inarguably one of the brand's biggest breakthroughs, both creatively with their Princess Margaret on acid-inspired looks, and financially with their first foray into bags. The bags in question didn't actually show on the catwalk, but they were small neon clutch bags that Christopher had actually initially made for Tammy, the co-creative director, while she was sick, but she loved it so much that she wore them often, catching the eye of Net-a-Porter, who decided to use them as part of their retail offering as the collection came into stores. They were a huge hit and really became the brand's first real cash cow product, something the brand was definitely in need of after financing so many collections privately or through grants and funds. They'd stumbled upon a way to make a hit product without compromising on the textile work that got the brand to be so beloved in the first place, with this collection featuring potentially my favorite textile manipulation, as the suits and subsequently the bags that appear to be lace were actually laser-cut real leather that was also treated to look like faux leather. So it was actually an inception of his signifiers of lace, which began in the graduate collection Autumn-Winter '06, and laser cutting, which came later in Spring-Summer '09. Though, something I did notice from his interviews around this time is that he said multiple times about how tired he was personally, which really reflects the impossible nature of the 2010s fashion landscape. You see, there were a lot of funds, several of which Christopher Kane, the person, won to get young designers the promise of growth. But there just isn't, and still is, little to no infrastructure to help them actually flesh that out into a business. Tammy is a wonderful business person, and she really was the strength behind the label. But with such a small team, going against fashion giants is not an easy nor fair playing field for any brand to succeed from. Though, saying that, they were seemingly doing the impossible and succeeding. Following yet another massive hit collection in Autumn-Winter '11 that once again brought in a cash cow, this time the gelatin bag that dominated the fashion space for about a year, they won the Vogue Fashion Fund of £200,000, the BFA New Establishment Award in 2011. By spring 2012, they introduced menswear and a bit later introduced resort collections with Resort 2013, and won the Women's Wear Designer of the Year award from the BFA in 2013. So you can understand why, with all of this commercial and promotional success, the weight on the shoulders of the brother-sister duo would have been immense by 2013. And therefore would reason their decision to sell 51% of the company to Kering. This, in my opinion, was the best chance that they had of having the company survive. Kering could offer worlds of promotion, logistics, information, recommendations, and finances that a small business simply cannot achieve. Kering restructured or optimized the whole logistics of the company and increased wholesale points of sale up to 90 globally. If the goal was to turn the company into a global powerhouse, it was Kering that could make that happen. Their debut under Kering, the Autumn-Winter '14 show, therefore was by far one of the brand's most successful to date. Not because it was the most creative or interesting, but because it turned Christopher Kane from a creative powerhouse into something that was a complete package, They reined in the creativity and forced them to understand what exactly it was that makes their product sell. As a result, the collection is concise, collected, and commercial without being dull, and most importantly, took all of that and transposed it into their first full handbag offering. A handbag offering that had one clear standout. The safety buckle bags were perfect for the time. Simple and therefore practical, and infused with exactly enough of if you know signifiers, with the inclusion of the safety buckle that dates all the way back to spring-summer 07 for the brand. It's exactly creative enough, practical enough, yet indistinct enough to be used season after season on multiple different classic bag styles, and therefore, unlike the two bags before it, could be sold season after season without much input from the brand at all. It was the real definition of a cash cow product, and one that still defines the brand to this day. This was the absolute pinnacle of the Christopher Kane company. However, during this time, while all of this great stuff was happening creatively, behind the scenes, things weren't quite so peachy. On the 30th of December 2014, they were served a first Gazette notice for compulsory strike-off. This is a warning from the government that they will force a liquidation of the company if they don't prove that they will change whatever it is the government is having a problem with. We don't actually know exactly what this was, but because the threat is there of liquidation, you can assume it's because they didn't fill in their government documents properly. I can definitely be wrong about this because there can be multiple reasons for a first Gazette, but regardless of the reason, I'm sure this was a very stressful time for the company, balancing being at the absolute height of their success while dealing with whatever this problem was internally. Luckily, this didn't last too long, however, and the first Gazette was repealed just after a week in January 2015 as the company released their Autumn-Winter 15 collection that was also a real success. Soon after, they also saw the first standalone store opened in Mayfair in London in 2015 and opened their own e-commerce store in 2016 that would sell their next attempt at a cash cow, Sunglasses, which released in 2016. As I mentioned, this was the pinnacle of Christopher Kane's success in terms of fashion shows and even commercially. However, that unfortunately means that from here, there was a decline in interest in the brand from this point forward. From between this Autumn-Winter 15 collection onto the Spring-Summer 18 collection, Christopher Kane started to see a natural decline in public interest. This was brought up in this head-to-head by Mima Viglesio and Stephen Jones from Show Studio that questions just how commercial the fashion offerings from the house were versus how intricately designed the work is versus just how eye-catching the clothes in the fashion show were. All of this is obviously tied to the fame of the brand. As the star of the brand name begins to fade, the customer is less likely to want to buy into garments that don't function on a day-to-day basis. i.e., when all of the fame starts to fade, the company really needs a few basic blocks to carry them through the inevitable lull in their popularity that just comes with being in fashion. And unfortunately, despite having wonderful textile manipulation, the company just didn't have many basics. At least not since the safety buckle bag 4 years prior. They had built themselves around these technically interesting garments, even in the Spring 2018 collection having pieces made from the same sponge as kitchen sponges, but they weren't necessarily easy to spot from a distance, nor were they practical, and so became lost in the immediacy of fashion. So the brand simply had less value than before. It still had value, but it just wasn't the supernova that it had been. So that's why it came as a bit of a surprise when Christopher and Tammy purchased their 51% stake that Kering had had in the business back shortly after this collection, despite Kering from their 2017 annual report having plans for expansion into new markets and even likely very lucrative licensing deals. Though their willingness to sell may have been attributed to their apparent weak sales in the Western, specifically American market, which, as we discussed, is probably just from his most buzzworthy years coming to a lull. So what was the reason? Why did they buy back the business? The truth is, we don't explicitly know. They gave up the security of having a parent company at probably a huge expense to them personally, so one would think that they would have a plan. But because of the timing, we were robbed of seeing that as the pandemic put what would have been their supposed plan to a halt. They were forced to cut staff, they closed their Mayfair store in 2020, though that had been a long time coming among slow foot traffic and Brexit fears, and in general the company was forced to plan around the pandemic, though they did still show, just digitally, showing 4 full collections and 1 pre-fall collection this way. But far more interesting than the mainline was a refocus the brand had initiated to launch their first diffusion line named More Joy, which itself was a reference to his Autumn-Winter 18 collection that featured the slogan on knits. So in fact, we do have a good idea why they split from Kering. It was probably for more joy. You see, if Kering had in their contract with Tammy and Christopher a non-compete clause, then that would leave them unable to start this second business in order to fund their mainline, which they also had been losing creative control of, being that it was half owned by Kering. So, it seems like they were willing to take the split from Kering in order to regain that creative control, get rid of that non-compete clause that is common in Kering contract, as we know from their whole mess with Hedi Slimane, and expand their business portfolio to include something a little more fruitful. So with their old head, Barry Mulholland, returning, he was absent for the Kering years, they ended up undoing all of the restructuring Kering had set up and returned to their old business model. Basically, knowing they were onto something potentially very lucrative, splitting from Kering was their best option for securing their financials for the future. What was teased as a seasonal experiment to see if the pieces would sell, they did, was stabilized, expanded on, and created what is effectively a merch line for Kane's greatest hits. Launching in June 2019, by July 2020, they were already stocked by Matches, Browns, Amazon Marketplace, their own website, and a plethora of other retailers, and now produce a wide range of products from t-shirts, mugs, blankets, scarves, phone cases, floor mats, vibrators, and umbrellas. And they were doing so successfully, quadrupling sales in 2020 with half the team that they once had at Kering. This brings us to today, when Christopher Kane has filed for administration. And yet, only if you were looking at half the business portfolio with a focus on the fact that they've just lost all of that Kering backing in the ready-to-wear side would this seem expected. Unfortunately for me reporting this, there is a lot of differing information surrounding this scenario for me to get a clear vision of what is going to happen. Some sources say the company is up for sale, others say it's a possibility if they cannot refinance their debt, and to be fair, this is because Christopher Kane isn't answering questions at this time. The only thing that they seem to really agree on is that there will be a push for promotion for the brand coming into this era, just like they had when they returned to the catwalk in Autumn-Winter 23. Personally, I would put my money on them using this as an opportunity for restructuring the brand completely, and them using this as a way to do that while accruing the least debt. They've already started restructuring in the pandemic. They seemingly don't want Kering to own shares, so you'd assume they don't want a parent company in general, and the More Joy label has such promise. I would imagine that they will just put more of a focus on that side of the business, move More Joy into being their main cash cow, financier, merch line that holds the weight of the company, while I would imagine that they will be back soon-ish with fashion shows in order to bring that brand value to the More Joy line instead of necessarily making it available for sale widely. A classic business structure, sure, but one that has been proven time and time again. I really do not think this is the end for the brand. And even if it does get bought by a parent company, it can easily be revived in the future, either as Christopher Kane or as More Joy, and so I genuinely wish them all the best when that does happen. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one. Check out my beauty channel for videos like this but about beauty brands, and my Patreon for early access.